Most people spend years dreaming about a different life without ever doing anything about it. Josh and Erin Myers spent 5 years quietly planning theirs, and then one morning in May 2018, they packed their kids into a 30-foot RV, drove into the West Virginia mountains, and never looked back. What followed turned into one of the most watched homesteading stories on the internet. Over 1 billion minutes of watch time, 1 million+ subscribers, and a brand worth millions. But behind that picture-perfect off-grid life is a story that most viewers only know pieces of, and by 2025, some of those pieces stopped fitting together the way people expected. This is the full story of Wild Wonderful Off-Grid, how it started, how it grew, what it became, and what's been left unanswered. To understand Wild Wonderful Off-Grid, you have to go back to 2013. Josh and Erin were living a completely ordinary life. Josh worked as an electrician. Erin had been a middle school teacher before stepping back to raise their kids. They had a house, a mortgage, car payments, the whole package. And somewhere around 2013, according to their own words in an early 2018 video, they hit a wall. The debt was suffocating. Not catastrophically, they weren't in crisis. But the slow grind of it, the sense that no matter how much they earned, they were always working for someone or something else, started to feel like a trap. They tried adjusting, cut expenses, dropped subscriptions, scaled back wherever they could. They got rid of TV streaming services, gym memberships, even most of their cell phone plans, keeping only Josh's work phone. They grew vegetables to cut grocery costs. But the mortgage was the problem that wouldn't go away, and the only way they could see past it was to get out of it entirely. That's when the plan started taking shape. Not a daydream, a real, budgeted, multi-year plan. They'd sell the house, pay off what they owed, find land, and build something from nothing, debt-free. The way people used to do it before everyone decided borrowing money was just how life worked. They spent years saving, researching, and waiting for the right moment. By 2018, they were ready. On May 10th, 2018, they launched the YouTube channel, loaded up the RV, and pointed themselves towards 73 acres of raw mountain land in West Virginia. No running water, no electricity, no house, just trees, a stream somewhere through the forest, and a whole lot of work ahead of them. The early episodes of Wild Wonderful Off-Grid have a specific energy that's hard to fake. There's no polished presentation, no perfect lighting, no scripted moments. It's a family living in a 30-foot RV on a mountain with 3 small kids, homeschooling them during the day, and trying to figure out how to build a house they'd never built before. Josh brought his electrical background, which helped enormously when it came to the off-grid power system. But the structural work, the framing, the roofing, the foundation, was largely figured out as they went. They'd originally planned to build a log cabin, even cutting timber and preparing logs for the build. That plan fell apart when their stockpiled materials were stolen. They pivoted to an A-frame design because it was more manageable to construct, and because the shape made sense for a family that planned to be there permanently. The winters in the West Virginia mountains don't leave much room for error. Building through snow, protecting materials from freeze, keeping the livestock they were accumulating alive, all of it played out on camera. Erin was the primary videographer and narrator, and her voice became the one millions of people associated with the channel. The authenticity wasn't manufactured. They were genuinely struggling, genuinely celebrating small wins, and genuinely making it work through sheer stubbornness. By mid-2020, the Myers family moved into their completed A-frame home. It had taken roughly 2 years of full-time building effort. The house had 4 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, was solar-powered, and sat on land they owned outright with no debt attached. Considering where they started, it was remarkable. And because they'd documented every single step of it, over 1 million people had watched it happen with them. The move-in wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a different chapter. As the home build wrapped up, the channel had to find its next purpose. The Myers handled that transition better than most creators do. They kept building. They started farming more seriously. They took on renovation projects, moved into real estate, and kept the audience engaged with new challenges and new milestones, rather than trying to stretch out a story that had already concluded. The numbers they were pulling were significant. Third-party estimates placed their YouTube revenue around $23,000 per month by 2024, putting them firmly in the category of creators who've turned a passion project into a full-time income that most professional careers can't match. Their overall net worth, factoring in the land value, equipment, the businesses they'd built, and a modest investment portfolio, was estimated at around $2.7 million by early 2024. That's not a figure they ever advertised. They kept the same modest, unglamorous presentation style that built the audience in the first place. But the math was there for anyone paying attention. The business side expanded steadily. Lore Collective became a legitimate e-commerce operation. Handmade soaps and candles tied to the brand's aesthetic sold online with real volume. They launched Wild Wonderful After Show, a secondary channel for more personal, behind-the-scenes family content that gave the most dedicated viewers a closer look at day-to-day life. A merch partnership with Bunker Branding added branded apparel to the revenue mix, and they formalized a real estate operation under the name Meyer Builders, with Josh applying his construction skills to cabin renovations and rental properties as part of what the couple described as their long-term retirement plan. The Myers were building a brand in the truest sense of the word, not just a YouTube channel. Every business was connected to the same identity: self-sufficient, debt-free, rooted in West Virginia, doing it yourself. It was coherent. It made sense. And then they added a cafe. Wild Roots Cafe opened in Romney, West Virginia in late 2023, and it wasn't a random side project. It grew out of a genuine friendship. Deanna Blackwell had crossed paths with Erin and Josh years earlier through the local homeschooling community, and over time that friendship evolved into a shared business vision. The cafe occupied a building on East Main Street in Romney, with a history stretching back to 1942. Originally a dairy business, later a bar, and now a renovated space that the Myers had personally transformed. The concept fit the brand perfectly. Local sourcing, community space, handcrafted food, the kind of slowed-down energy the whole channel had always promoted. Erin described it publicly as a beautiful blending of strengths. Blackwell running the kitchen, the Myers handling the renovation and build side. It had the same formula that made the homestead videos work: people doing something meaningful with their hands, in a place they cared about, for a community they were part of. Local farms started supplying the cafe regularly. One operation near Capon Bridge was delivering roughly 80 pounds of sausage every single month. Another supplier handled eggs. The place had become a genuine fixture in Romney, one of those small-town spots that people build routines around, that visitors get directed to, that locals feel ownership over. Community members followed its progress through the channel. It felt like proof that the values behind Wild Wonderful Off-Grid weren't just content, they were real. And then, one morning in early September 2025, a local egg supplier showed up to make his usual delivery and found the doors locked, lights off. The cafe simply gone. A farmer who had been supplying the restaurant found out the same morning. A phone call from the egg supplier who had just discovered it himself. He'd been told that the other owners had decided to pull out and that the business had been dissolved. That was it. No warning, no transition period, no final service. Just a shuttered building and a word spreading through the local farming network that their largest account was suddenly gone. The local Hampshire Review newspaper attempted to reach Josh and Erin for comment. They were unsuccessful. Nobody in the community, not the farmers, not the regulars, not the press, appeared to know what had actually happened or why. The response on Facebook from people in Romney was a mix of genuine surprise and frustration. People who had supported the business from day one, eaten there regularly, promoted it to out-of-towners, left comments expressing how wrong it felt that no explanation had been given to the community that had shown up for the place. The cafe's online presence went cold. The channel kept uploading. And for a family who had made transparency the entire foundation of their brand, who had put every plumbing mistake and inspection failure and budget breakdown on camera for years, the silence around this one thing was striking in a way that's hard to fully explain. It wasn't just unusual, it was the opposite of everything the channel had always stood for. What happened? Nobody outside of Josh and Erin knows. The fact that it was described as a dissolution rather than a bankruptcy or an emergency closure suggests a deliberate decision was made rather than a crisis overtaking them. The word "pulled out" implies an intentional exit, but the why has never been addressed publicly, and as of early 2026, it still hasn't been. While the cafe story was still fresh, another detail surfaced that caught even longtime viewers off guard. In August 2025, Josh and Erin posted about visiting a remote property for the first time in nearly 5 years, a 25-acre private island they had quietly purchased all the way back in early 2021. They'd bought it the year after the A-frame was completed, when the channel was riding its biggest wave of momentum. Sat on it for 4 years, said nothing publicly, and then in mid-2025 brought a camera along for the first visit. The plans for the island aren't small. They intend to build individual bungalows across the property, a long-term family project with a scale that the early RV on a mountain version of this family would have found unimaginable. From a 30-foot camper with no electricity to a 25-acre island with bungalow construction plans, the trajectory is genuinely difficult to wrap your head around. What's interesting is the restraint. Most creators in their position would have announced the island purchase the moment it happened. The algorithm rewards announcements. The audience would have gone wild for it. Instead, they held it for nearly half a decade, revealing it only when they were ready to actually start documenting something happening on it. That kind of patience is either calculated long-game content strategy or genuine private priority. And with Josh and Erin, it's never been entirely clear which one it is. Maybe it's always been both. Either way, the island quietly reframes the picture of what this family has actually built. The homestead was always the central story. The businesses added layers. But a private island purchased in 2021, the year after they finished the house, before most viewers had even caught up to where the channel was headed, suggests that by that point, the financial success of Wild Wonderful Off-Grid had moved into a genuinely different category than anyone on the outside was tracking. By late 2025, Wild Wonderful Off-Grid was 7 years into its run. The A-frame that started it all was still standing and still being worked on. Recent content documented a major addition to the original structure, with a new roof section being fully closed in ahead of another West Virginia winter. The solar system that Josh had built and rebuilt multiple times over the years was undergoing another complete upgrade. The farm was still operating. The kids were older, still part of the content, still woven into the story in the natural way they always had been. The numbers remained strong. The channel gained 20,000 new subscribers between June and August of 2025 alone and crossed 1.12 million total. With over 305 million lifetime views, it sits in a tier of homesteading and lifestyle channels that very few creators ever reach. The audience didn't disappear. The engagement didn't crater. Whatever happened with the cafe, the core channel absorbed it without visible damage. But something had shifted in the story. Not in a way that's easy to point to, more in a way you feel when you've been watching long enough. This channel spent its entire first chapter being relentlessly open. Every mistake documented, every setback aired, every financial decision explained to an audience that was, in many ways, the reason any of it was possible. That openness was the product. It was what made people trust them, invest in them emotionally, show up video after video, and bring their friends with them. When that same family quietly dissolved a business that had employed local people, sourced from local farms, and become part of a small town's identity, and then said nothing about it to the audience that had followed their every move for years, it introduced a question that hadn't existed before. Not about their honesty exactly, more about the limits of the transparency they'd always offered. The version of themselves they put on camera was always curated to some degree. Every creator's version is. But the cafe made that curation visible in a way it hadn't been before. As of early 2026, the Myers are still at it. The Island project is moving forward. The homestead keeps growing. New videos go up on a regular schedule. The brand is intact. Lore Collective still operates. Meyer Builders is still active. And somewhere in Romney, West Virginia, a building that used to be Wild Roots Cafe sits empty on East Main Street with no public explanation attached to it. The story of Wild Wonderful Off-Grid is not a cautionary tale. It doesn't fit that shape cleanly. Two people with no construction experience, no farming background, and no obvious path out of a suburban mortgage built something that generated millions of dollars, moved millions of people to rethink how they were living, and left a genuine mark on a corner of West Virginia that most Americans would drive through without stopping. But it's also a story about what happens when transparency becomes a brand rather than a habit. For years, the camera showed everything. Then, at a certain point, probably around the time the money got serious and the businesses got complicated, it started showing what they chose to show. That's not a betrayal. That's just adulthood. That's just how things go when the stakes get high enough that not everything belongs on camera anymore. The viewers who've been there since the RV days, watching Erin film Josh pouring a concrete footing in a West Virginia winter with fingers probably numb behind the lens, they built something too. They built a relationship with a family on a screen, and they made that family's dream possible with every view and every purchase and every comment that kept the algorithm happy. What they get in return is still more than most creators offer, just not quite everything anymore. And maybe that's the real answer to what happened to Wild Wonderful Off-Grid. Nothing catastrophic, nothing broken, just the natural distance that grows between people and the camera they once held up to every corner of their lives. When the life gets big enough that not all of it fits in the frame anymore,